Hi friends, in this episode of Virtual Instruments I'd like to do a short walkthrough of Embertone's Popelka Bassoon. This is an amazing and very easy to use instrument. It has fantastic legato transitions from one note to the next, and each note was recorded with two dynamics, mezzo forte and forte. Since there are only two dynamic levels recorded, to my ears, when played at extremely soft dynamics, it sounds like Embertone might have EQ'd out some high frequencies off of the mezzo forte samples to emulate what a real instrument would do acoustically. Whatever the case, it sounds convincing to me. Additionally, there doesn't appear to be any phasing issues with the legato transitions, and the samples include realistic noises like key clacks and reed noise, making this a very intuitive and playable instrument. The legato is chromatically recorded, meaning each chromatic note was separately recorded, and each recording is assigned to a specific key on the keyboard. For example, some manufacturers will record one note that is assigned to a specific key on the keyboard. Then they will use that same recorded note on the next lowest key on the keyboard, but detune it a half step. Not so in the case of this instrument. I'm also happy to say that this is becoming more of a rarity as computers become more powerful. So let's go ahead and load this into Contact now. The opening page in the user interface is the performance page, which you can verify in the bottom left corner. This is the page you'll most likely want to watch to verify the instrument is performing the way you want it to in real time. If you click on the Popelka Bassoon name, you'll see the info page, which has a short description of the instrument and the developers. To get back to the performance page, click the Performance tab. The blue keys are all the available playable instrument notes and mirrors the actual playable range of a bassoon, although the low end is extended a bit. This bassoon goes to a low G, or G1, and I've heard bassoons go as low as an F, but the common usable range of a bassoon is typically from B-flat 1 to E5. Bear this in mind if you're intending to have a real bassoonist play what you've written, since those lower notes are more difficult to play and articulate quickly. The pink keys below the blue keys are your key switches, which choose your articulations. For example, pressing C will choose long notes, which are your sustain and legato samples. The sustain samples are long-held notes which are triggered when you depress a key and hold it. You can hold a note for as long as you like, even to the point where a real bassoonist would run out of breath. It will keep cycling the middle part of the sustain sample until the key on the keyboard or your sustain pedal is released, whereupon the release sample is triggered, which is the recorded release part of the bassoonist played note and contains the sound of the recorded venue, primarily early reflections. Pressing a key softly results in a gradual slow entrance into a note, while forcefully pressing a key results in a sharp accented attack and immediate entrance. The legato samples are triggered whenever you play two notes in succession in a legato fashion and are quickly inserted between those two notes, imitating what a real instrument does. Real instruments do not immediately go from one note to another, but rather have a very quick audible transition between those two notes. For example, here's C to G, and I'll put a little space in between the two notes. Now watch what happens if I hold onto the C a little longer and let it overlap into the G. You can hear the legato samples playing in between those two notes. The timbre and volume between the sustain and legato samples is incredibly consistent. In most virtual instruments, legato is triggered when you let two notes overlap. The D key chooses your short notes, which are your staccato and marcato samples. Each staccato note has plenty of round robins. This means that every time you press the same key repeatedly, it will trigger a different recorded sample, hence the term round robin. This avoids the machine gun effect you get when the exact same sample is triggered over and over and aids in the overall sense of realism. These round robin samples were recorded at various dynamic levels, which are triggered by how hard you hit the keys on your keyboard. The marcato samples are triggered by velocity, are somewhat longer than the staccatos, and are a little accented. So hitting the keys harder will trigger marcato samples, while a softer touch will trigger staccatos. The E key switch selects the auto configuration. Selecting auto allows you to not have to worry about key switching between long and short articulations. So if you play a long note, you'll hear the sustain or legato samples. If you play a short note, you'll hear the staccato or marcato samples. There is nothing assigned to the C sharp and D sharp keys. The articulation you are triggering can be verified in the performance page under the articulation setting. By default, the mod wheel CC number 1 controls the amount of vibrato depth. This can be reassigned by right-clicking on vibrato depth, click Learn MIDI CC Automation, and then moving whichever controller you wish to use for vibrato. All of the CC numbers for dynamics, vibrato depth, vibrato speed, and vibrato delay can be assigned to different MIDI controllers in this fashion. I usually assign the mod wheel to dynamics. The dynamics control how loud or soft the instrument is through the use of volume as well as triggering the different dynamic levels recorded. Vibrato depth affects how much vibrato you desire. Vibrato speed is how fast or slow the wobbling of the vibrato is. Vibrato delay is how fast or slow the vibrato comes in after a note is played. This is with no delay, and this is with the delay set to the highest setting. As you can see, all of these parameters can be manually changed by clicking and dragging on their respective bars with the mouse. The instrument is in mono mode by default and allows you to play only one note at a time, just like a real bassoon. Clicking poly will allow you to play chords but will disable all legato transition samples. To the right of this button is the onboard reverb where you can adjust the levels by click dragging with your mouse. If you click on the reverb name, you can drag down to select one of 8 different reverb impulse responses. The dynamic range settings allow you to somewhat limit or make more pronounced the volume differences between the mezzo forte and forte dynamic samples. Setting it to 0 by click dragging with your mouse retains the timbre of each of the mezzo forte and forte dynamic samples but somewhat limits the difference in volume. Setting it to 100 also retains the timbre differences between the mezzo forte and forte dynamic samples, but the difference in volume is more pronounced. The dynamic threshold sets the threshold point where the mezzo forte and forte samples transition. Both of these settings can be adjusted by click dragging your mouse. These are both pretty intuitively set, so I leave them alone. If you click the Configure tab, it opens the Configure page where you can adjust more parameters. If you click the Adaptive Legato button, it will load about 20 megabytes more and shortens or lengthens the legato transitions depending on how fast or slow you play. It's particularly impressive for fast runs, although it really sounds good either way to me. You may want to try playing with it on or off depending on the nature of the particular phrase. Here's with it off, and here's with it on. Release samples turns the release samples on or off. I would suggest leaving them on. If we turn this button off and then turn off the reverb, you'll see the difference that the release samples make to the sound. Long dynamics can be triggered either by CC number assignments or by velocity. If you set this to velocity, the volume of the sustain and legato samples will be triggered by how soft or hard you play. Notice the mod wheel is not moving. If you use this setting, be aware that you cannot adjust the volume of the note after it has been triggered. It will remain at that same volume. I leave this set to CC so I can shape the volume of the sustain note over time. These CC or velocity selections are available for the staccato or marcato samples as well. I keep these set to velocity since they are short samples and don't sustain long enough to need volume changes mid-note. Notice the volume of each of these short dynamic samples is strictly determined by how hard or soft I hit the keys. Long round robin applies to sustain and legato samples, but isn't really an actual round robin, borrowing retuned neighbor notes similar to what we talked about earlier with the older sample libraries, to achieve the illusion of a round robin for sustain and legato samples. If I play a middle C slightly sustained, you will hear this borrowed neighbor note once every 3 times. I leave this off. SEQ means in sequence, while R&D means random. If it's in sequence mode, it means the round robin samples will be played sequentially. If it's in random mode, it means those 3 samples will be played in a random order. On the other hand, short round robins are actual round robins for staccato and marcato samples. You can also set these round robin samples to trigger sequentially or randomly by selecting the SEQ or R&D buttons respectively. I keep this set to SEQ since I don't want to risk having the same random sample triggered twice in a row. If we move over to continuous controls, you can manually assign any CC numbers to dynamics, vibrato depth, vibrato speed, vibrato delay, and reverb amount here. Once set, these parameters can be adjusted on the fly while playing through your chosen controller. For example, let's assign the reverb amount to CC1, which is the mod wheel. Watch what happens to the reverb now if I move the mod wheel. The rightmost column deals with key switches, and you can manually assign where you want your key switches to be triggered on your keyboard. If you click the little circle next to each of these articulations and then press a key on your keyboard, it will reassign that articulation to that key. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button.